excited to be on the stage together. Mm-hmm. It's truly a moment indeed. So I'll just go ahead and get started with introductions, and we're going to just take our time this morning. We've got a nice, healthy chunk of time to spend reviewing several years of our contributions to audio, to music. So my name is Leslie Gaston Bird. I'm a governor at large for the Audio Engineering Society. I have my own company, Mixed Messiah Productions. I specialize in re-recording for film and television. I'm an author of a book coming out in December called Women in Audio. Nice. And my historical contribution is I'm the first African American to sit on the board of governors of AES. Yeah. And that's in the organization's 71-year history. Mm-hmm. All right, so we're going to introduce Prince Charles Alexander, who's over at the end.
Hey, how are you?
Grammy-winning music producer, engineer, recording artist, and professor of music production and engineering for Berkeley. And I know I've seen you blowing up social media with some of your famous alumni, too, who you've run into here.
Gotta do the social media, right?
And then in the middle there, it's not in seated order, but Ebitda is there, and audio engineer, producer, founder of the Creator Suite, and so much more. I had the pleasure of interviewing Ebitda for the book, and she's got such a rich history working in New York, studying in New York, and I'm sure she'll be able to tell you more about that as we go along. James, is sitting here with us today. Should I call you Jay or James?
Jay.
That's
fine.
All right. And Jay's in San Diego, 3-time Grammy-nominated recording engineer, producer, and audio educator. And it's been my honor to learn about James's history of education in general and how he works diversity into his curriculum. Something to be very proud of, indeed. And then we have Ebony Smith. Ebony was on a couple panels I saw yesterday talking about sampling. She's a Grammy-winning engineer, producer, and singer-songwriter. I should also have on this slide that she's founder of Gender Amplified, which is doing a great work here in the New York area. And like I said, as we go along, I'd like for each of the panelists to say and incorporate your history into these things that we're sharing. Mm-hmm. And then sitting next to me is Willie Green, who is producer, engineer, and chair of the HipHop and R&B track of the AES Convention Committee, and another first. Yesterday I got to see the first inaugural panel session for the HipHop and R&B track. This is a new track. And I know just all the heavy hitters that you bring to the stage just must be such a thrill to be sharing the stage and bringing this knowledge to attendees here at AES.
It's exciting. We do this event in New York every year in the birthplace of hip hop, the most dominant music, genre in the world today. And we haven't been focusing on hip hop and on R&B. And, I want to say thank you to the AES because they've been very supportive in the initiatives we brought forth in trying to do this. And, I've got some very talented friends and a little bit of a long reach, and I was able to reach out to people I've looked up to my whole life who made the records that made me want to be here and share the stage with them, and that's pretty exciting.
That is truly, I got chills yesterday watching the crowds that came out to see a lot of these events, and it shows how we're embracing the culture that has really been driving the audio industry, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that as we go. So I just wanted to read the abstract just so you know what you guys are in for. If you haven't read your program already, African Americans have contributed to the popular music recording industry in a number of ways. And although our achievements and their achievements are visible, their representation at technical conferences and on the exhibit floor is less so. So join us today for a discussion on how African Americans have been blazing trails behind the scenes in the recording industry and how we can best engage them and welcome them to access the social and scholarly networks that have benefited us. And by that, I'm talking about the Audio Engineering Society. Topics include technological pedagogy for hip-hop education and dispelling the stereotype that African American engineers are only able to work in black music genres. That's just silly. That's just silly. All right. So up for discussion today, and of course we have lots of time to spend, so we have a mic available for a Q&A afterwards or even during, if you're so moved. So let's talk about fostering technical and cultural competency in the digital audio workstation generation. How do we design for more inclusive recording studio environments? How do we create better pathways for emerging talent? Hip-hop production and its influence on model recording techniques across genres, for example, bass and low-end focus, programmed drum production, and recording in the red, as explained in Trisha Rose's Black Noise, 1994. The contributions of black women in technical recording spaces. Historical and cultural perceptions of black engineers, making space for African Americans in non-traditionally black styles, for example, rock, EDM, etc. The lack of representation in media and publications, like magazines and podcasts. Some of the obstacles we face and some of the successes and impacts of black engineers. So the way I organize this is I tried to sort of look backward and then look forward, trying to kind of go chronologically, but I have a sense we're just going to go all over the place. So let's put the first one forth. And you know what? I think I have a little bit of something going on with my slides here. Sorry. So I just, spoiler alert. Anyway, so I want to tell you about a woman who I came across in my preparation for a book, Women in Audio. So I came across Vivian Carter Bracken, and I was thinking to myself, well, she's beautiful, you know. That's the first thing that struck me is you know, she's a beautiful woman, and she's noted for starting a record company with her husband, James Bracken. And so the story goes, she's from Gary, Indiana, and she traveled to Chicago to start a radio show. There's lots of talent in Chicago in the 50s. And so they were actually the first label in the United States to sign the Beatles. And I'm not sure we know that. So that was VJ Records was the first label in the United States to have the Beatles, and they carried them for a year. The name of the record is Introducing the Beatles. There's fascinating history that you can find if you look up VJ Records and Introducing the Beatles. They got sued shortly after that because the Beatles signed, I think they still had a contract in England, and then in England they saw the Beatles were getting major, so they came and tried to stop the release of Introducing the Beatles, which came out like 10 days before the Beatles' other breakthrough United States album. So anyway, check it out. But interestingly, before the Beatles, there was also songs they produced. Good Night, Sweetheart. Yeah, it's time to go. John Lee Hooker's Boom Boom. Gene Chandler's Duke of Earl, The Four Seasons, Walk Like a Man, Big Girls Don't Cry, The Dells, One a Night, Dee Clark, Nobody But You, and the Pips, who would eventually become Gladys Knight and the Pips. Yeah. Wow. And then we also know from history, here's Sylvia Robinson, who is known for producing the first rap song, Rapper's Delight. But did you know she didn't come out of nowhere? She had a career before that. She was known as Little Sylvia. And she had a song in the 70s called Pillow Talk. That's right. Yeah. And so it's history that we don't know. And so, you know, it's one of the things I'd like to do is share that history today, which we will do now by talking about some of the influential recording producers and recording engineers that our panelists have suggested. So I can't remember who put forth who. So who's got Barney Perkins?
I did Barney
All right,
Perkins.
go for it.
Barney Perkins is just a legend. I never met him. I've heard about him. Actually, Carl, you probably know more about Barney Perkins than I do. But Barney was on the West Coast, And he was involved in a lot of the early Temptation stuff, the Whisper stuff. And when I started getting into audio engineering, I was like, so where are the brothers? Who are the brothers? And I started hearing about this legend, Barney Perkins. So I did a little bit of research, and there's not many pictures, not really a lot of information. I think it's worthy of a bit of study, and it might be one of the things on my docket to look into a bit more. I also did Jimmy. Everybody knows Jimmy Douglas. When I was, I think, 15 years old, there was a song called Slide by a group called Slave. And I loved it. It was, in those days, there were only 3 TV stations. If a hit came out, the Ohio Players, Commodores, Kool and the Gang, everybody ran to that record. We all ran to that record. And then I started finding out that there was this young black engineer that was behind the record. And that engineer was 19 years old. That was Jimmy Douglas back in the day. And later on, it happened that I met Jimmy, and we've become friends. And he's a legend, and he's gone across so many genres. Definitely somebody of note.
Definitely. I just wanted to share that I'm from Dayton, Ohio. Does anybody on our panel know the importance of Dayton, Ohio?
Of course. That's the capital of funk,
That's
baby.
right. So that's the birthplace of funk. So I just want to say, every day when I would ride my bike, there was this big house on the top of the hill, and they're like, "Oh, that's one of the Ohio Players lives in that house up there." Oh, that's really cool. All right, so let's.
And Leslie Brathwaite did
continue.
Cardi B recently. He also mixed Happy. He's an audio engineer out of Atlanta. He held down Patchwork Recording in Atlanta for a long time, one of their main engineers. And he's just a great person, young, personable. He gives back freely to education. I take a trip to Atlanta from Berklee College of Music every year, and Leslie's been one of our hosts. Phenomenal engineer.
And he was doing Mix with the Masters yesterday.
Yes,
Gave
and
an
he
excellent talk.
did Wednesday and Thursday. I'm not sure if he's doing it today, but he's definitely at least done 2 sessions.
Yeah, check him out.
And when I started as an artist myself, I've transitioned from being an artist producer to an engineer producer and now an educator producer. And when I was an artist, I wasn't really comfortable with the way my music sounded, and I got more curious, and that's how I got into engineering. What got me into engineering was all the years that I had been making music. I didn't realize this, but the people that were working on my music were assistant engineers. Because I didn't know anything about the studio. I just was like an arranger. I'd go in, I have my drummer, my bass player, my guitar player, so forth and so on. So as time goes on, I'm like, why don't I sound like Parliament Funkadelic? How come I don't sound like the Ohio Players? I sound okay, but I want to sound like them. And then I walked into the studio in New York, and James Nichols was in the studio. I said, please help me sound like Parliament Funkadelic. So he said, let's listen to the record. He listened to Parliament, listened to my music. It took him 20 minutes.
Wow.
I had been doing this for years with the engineers, trying to come up with a vocabulary, trying to find this sound. He listened, and in 20 minutes, he gave me the sound that I had been looking for. And I was like, maybe there's something to your cultural background that has informed you about how to get to this music. And then later on, I ran into Kevin Reynolds, and which wasn't mine, but that's my list. And so once I saw Kevin and James, I thought to myself that maybe if I dug into engineering a bit more, that my production skills would be enhanced, and that I'd be able to give back to the music and back to the culture better.
Thank you. Yeah. Now, Butch was Jay.
Yeah, right. So when I was coming up in the late 70s and 80s, and I wanted to be a recording engineer, people told me I couldn't be because there were no black recording engineers. So that, of course, made me more determined to be a recording engineer. And one of the people that I found, because people kept saying, well, do you know Butch Jones? You know this guy, Butch Jones? And later, years later, I found out that people were asking him, do you know Jay Henry? He's like the only other black guy I know. Of course, there's a rich history here, but we don't really kind of get the exposure. But Butch was a role model for me, which I think is very important for anybody coming up in any kind of industry, is to have a role model. Mentors, of course, are great, but role models, somebody who is like you, that looks like you, that comes from your cultural background, that you can say, wow, if he did it, I can do it as well. So he's known for his work with Madonna. and a lot of iconic artists. But what I like about Butch is he's very diverse in his record credits. He works with classical artists. He does pop music. He's probably one of the best vocal engineers I've ever known in my life. He's so meticulous and just a beautiful person, a really humble guy. And he was instrumental in motivating me to stay focused on what I wanted to do. So that's why I put him on the list.
Now we have a few more suggestions. Who's got these three?
That's me.
Okay.
Pat Viala. He's an amazing engineer. I started at Quad in the late 90s, and he was the only black engineer there who, I believe he was an assistant when I started as an intern, but he quickly was rising, up the ranks. He, I know, assisted you and recorded with you.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
give me some credits.
But that was like James was saying, having a role model, especially as a woman and as a black woman in that space, and seeing nobody else who looked like you, that was huge. He's very personable, very cool, would let me sit in on his sessions, teach me things. So Pat Vial really stood out for me. Next person I put up, it's almost like a fast forward to now, Ayanna DePaz. She was on the team that, for her, that just won the Grammy. And she's just an up-and-coming audio engineer that's driven and really inspiring. It's great to see that young energy from a black woman. And then Amanda Davis always inspires me. I don't know her, but I've never seen a black woman in the live space making moves as she does. So those are the three I had up there.
And the story that I heard from, I believe, I don't know if Fela's around, but Fela was telling me that the reason Amanda Davis got that job, and don't take this as gospel, comes to me secondhand, but Janelle Monáe said, I want a black engineer.
I believe that.
So, I mean, that's how that happened.
Yeah.
And she deserves she's got the right to be in that space, and she's killing it.
That's usually how it happens. Like LMA, I know, requested an all-female sound engineer team for her last tour. And it was Jess Jacobs and Amanda Davis on it. So that's the lead front of house. So yeah.
So if anybody wants to hashtag inclusion writer. All right, and then I think these are for Ebony.
Oh, that's me. Oh, it's a combination, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, VNotes is a up-and-coming producer through the Creator Suite organization that I started to support women in music production. I have the privilege and honor to be in community with a lot of emerging, outstanding, I don't want to say emerging, nobody's heard of them, but they're doing great work in the industry. VNotes is one of them. You're going to hear her name. She's worked with Karen Wheeler, Joel Ortiz, Grandmaster Flash. She's building a lot of talent under her own label, and I just wanted to highlight her. And then...
Hi, good morning. Thanks for getting up and being here. The first person is Sylvia Moy, actually, who did a lot of work at Motown, was a woman, also a musician and an arranger, composer, but she's most notable for the work that she did with Stevie Wonder. So she's somebody to know about from history. Nova Wave, they're contemporary, and they are silently taking over. They're multi-Grammy Award-winning artists. I think the first time I heard about a record they did, it was Crazy by Kehlani. And I just didn't understand why nobody was really speaking a lot about them as a production team. The two of them, Bree and Shay, two women. One pretty much handles all the production work, and the other is more of a singer-songwriter, and they collaborate beautifully. Their latest collaboration was on the recent Jay-Z and Beyonce, The Carters album, which they won a Grammy for. And they've worked with Jay-Z as well, and also Megatron, Nicki Minaj's latest record, which they co-produced. So I think part of their desire is to be under the radar, because production is kind of a behind-the-scenes art, and that's fine. But also, I think it's important for us to shout them out so that people know that they're really women of color in the business, making inroads in a positive way and winning Grammys. Then there's Wonder Girl, who I think most people know about to some degree. She first made her debut at 16. She produced Crown, which won her Grammy. That was on Jay-Z's Magna Carta. And that's when I first heard about her. I think she might be 22 now. and she's done a lot of different collaborations. Particularly, you may know Antidote by Travis Scott. She produced that. But she's producing lots of records over the years for so many artists, and she's quickly making a name for herself. And I think probably in a couple more years, we may see her being up for Producer of the Year.
And also, most of the people we've been talking about are American, but I think she's from Canada.
She's Canadian,
Yeah.
Toronto.
So then I have to change the name of my slide to Black People in Audio, but it's all right. So
Still part of the Americas.
yeah, there you go.
See, there it is.
Thank you, Jay. You're bailing me out again.
Quick thinking, right?
All right, so I have
Slide in there.
yeah, I need to go back to my discussion points because I noticed an omission in the next slide. So I'm going to have to pull up my slide of like all of the discussion points. This is more a note for my panelists than anybody else. Okay, and for you.
Hey, they look good.
Something about, I don't know. It's not an age thing. I don't know what to blame this on. Just, there we go. Okay, so let's take these in any order because I think they're all great discussion points. And like I said, we've got plenty of time to go through these. We don't have to rush this morning. So the first one was fostering technical and cultural competency in the dot generation. So how do we design for more inclusive recording studio environment? So, you know, as this is a collaborative panel, I think I'll toss it to the person who brought this one up. Was it you, Paul, who might have had this topic?
It might have been me.
Okay, yeah, go for it. So what are we getting at here? What do we want to talk about?
So I found out in my career, once I started pursuing technology, that many of the engineers, that was their only thing. And they were very protective of that space. I remember walking up to an engineer on 54th Street, and I was like curious, and I'm in school and stuff. I said, so what's that patch doing? Why do you have that patch? He looked at me like, it's not school right now. You know, like just go out, because I was doing a saxophone date. Just go out and play your saxophone and leave me alone. And I was like, excuse me. So that protective space was kind of like, it put me back, but I was like, but you're not gonna stop me. And in my own efforts to try to hand off technology to another generation, I always remember that story, and I've got other things that I do. I am a producer and a songwriter, so I don't have that same protective energy around my engineering knowledge and my engineering understanding. So I give as freely as possible, but then in giving freely as possible, I want to be as accurate as possible. So I'm not like it's kind of sort of like this. I'm like, it's specifically like this. It's 48,000 samples per second. That sample is about this size. Let's go there and look at that grain in Pro Tools. And, you know, honestly, I see a lot of people gloss over, of all colors. And some of it might have to do with a generation where the tools do a lot of work for you. And probably all of us up here come from a generation where we had to understand the tools, we had to calibrate the tools so that they could do the work correctly. And the tools now are like, open it up and it'll work. And I try to break as many of those habits in the educational space as I can. I try to do my best to offer it as much as I can. But we're also up against an education system in high school and in grammar school that is pulling students away from that deep introspective technology understanding. And by the time I get them in college, there are already bad habits. So it's a constant discussion, meeting with other Black educators of how can we dig down to lower and lower levels of the education system and infuse that curiosity, that hunger, that quest as Black technologists. And I mean, it's going to happen. And some of it starts from manufacturing, and I just want to let other people weigh in. But we've got a lot of work to do because we are there, we are competent. But at the same time, if we hand it off to people that are not curious and interested in the handoff, then I'm not sure. But at the same time, people will be creative with whatever you give them, and black people will create. If you give them a penny, they'll figure out how to make that penny
How to turn
dance.
it.
Well, we can work with that penny, but if we got that same dollar that everybody got, we could
Well.
stretch that further. And I think you really hit it on the head, Charles, with the foundation in schools from early on. I went to the AES High School Educators Conference over the summer and spoke to a lot of people, and a lot of people were like, well, Paul, we want to incorporate hip-hop into our curriculums. We got music programs, but we're not doing this. And even the New York schools, I'm like, okay, well, you got band, you've got even your electronic music class or whatever, or your recording classes, it's, well, let's record guitars, let's record drum sets, and that's great. But you have to meet young people where they're at to really have an impact. And if you're 10 years old and you are now grown up listening to Drake and Kendrick and Migos, you're not necessarily drawn to, okay, I want to grab this guitar. Right. You want to grab a synth. You want to grab a drum machine. We need to set people up to learn those things early on. And that requires the educators to respect these musical forms.
To respect things like auto-tune. Even Jay-Z came out and said auto-tune is dead. That was not really a cool thing, because look at Travis and all the artists where auto-tune is a part of their ability to create.
Right.
And I would say, I think you have to think about your population and how are people being acclimated and how are people being instructed and educated. The school system is one way. I think young people supplement what they learn in school with what they learn online, whether it be on YouTube or Instagram or wherever. Yeah. But I do think the school system is still the place where all young people have to filter through. And in my opinion, every school should have a music production, a computer music composition curriculum.
Correct.
Every single school, it should be something that's federally mandated. For private schools and charter schools, they should also have to adhere. If there's standardized testing, there should be standardized testing around this, so that it fits into a type of protocol. And I think the point of it would be showing the connection between STEM and STEAM, right? STEM being science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. STEAM being the arts application of that, right? Because in my own personal experience, it wasn't until I got into computer music composition that I cared about fidelity, that I cared about binary, that I cared about electronics, right? So I was a musician first and I was concerned about that. But once I realized that computers could help me serve that end, it sent me into these other aspects of the sciences that I wouldn't have ordinarily been concerned about, right? So science, technology, engineering, mathematics, physics, chemistry, and now I'm an engineer, right? So I'm a STEM field professional. Right, so it really has a full circle element to it, but the point I'm trying to make here is that it wasn't until college that I made that connection, and I made it on my own. If that connection was made in high school, even earlier, elementary school, if you put a laptop in front of a kid that would ordinarily be taking chorus or band, right, and expand your chorus or band program or your traditional music program to incorporate computer music education, then you're effectively killing multiple birds with one stone. No offense to anybody who's from PETA in the audience. But yeah, that's it's very simple solution-wise. Every school in America should have a computer music composition curriculum as a part of the general curriculum, not an elective that can be optional or optioned out of, but an actual, you have to graduate this school to have this. You have to have this to graduate.
I think I would take it even further and say, just in terms of connecting it to STEM and STEAM and connecting it to women and girls in STEM and STEAM.
Absolutely.
I think the research is showing us that it's between ages 8 to 12 where we start losing girls. Yeah. And that was true in the 70s, it's true in the 90s, and it's getting a little bit better now because of the initiatives that are out there. So, there's lots of benefits to this. So, I mean, to see some advocacy around this would be
I have twins that are 8 years old. I have a boy and a girl, and my son is like a math whiz, and my daughter, for some reason, is not at that level, and I'm doing my best, and my wife is doing our best to work hard at that. But you know, the society at large, whatever it might be, at school, or from the television, they don't really do a whole lot of online stuff. But it's like there's a pulse around the culture. You could have the kids not watch TV, but they got to go to school. But there's a pulse around the culture that says, you, girl, cannot do this.
Yes.
And it's such hard work for parents to get into the minds of their young daughters and say, you can do this. And it's a day by day by day by day process, you know, in order to infuse that information. And then one day it kicks in. And then you get an Ebitda or an Ebony or a Leslie.
So, you know, one of the things I think I'd like to touch on is circling back to what you initially said, that cloak of secrecy that people like to put around what they do is really comes from more trying to make it more magical and mystical than it really is.
Yeah. And then you can,
And one of the things that I ran into when I first became a college professor was I said, well, why isn't there any hip hop in the music program? Literally, the faculty told me that hip hop was not music.
oh God.
And I said, you wouldn't think that if you saw one of those checks that they're cutting. You would have a completely different impression. So one of the things that I'm blessed with is we have a lot of funding. So I was able to establish a program that incorporates computers and music, computer literacy from the get-go. So that's one of the first prerequisite courses that they have to do before they get into the studio. So the studio thing is almost like, you know, it's like where everybody wants to be. And young kids come to me and they go, well, you know, I want to get in the studio. I said, well, that's going to be about maybe a year and a half or 2 years away. There's, you know, 3 semesters of things you're going to have to do before that. And one of them is computer literacy. And certainly getting in earlier, the better. And there's no reason why not to do it, because that's really what makes the difference. Understanding the technology, understanding how things work, but more importantly, understanding how things interact with each other, how they fit together, how the pieces of the puzzle fit together, because then you're able to move it around and it doesn't seem like Hogwarts anymore. It's not like some magical mystery tour. It's just technology, because technology constantly changes. So what is new and hot today is going to be old. But like if you ask somebody today, an engineer, to align a Studer A80, they'd be like, what's an A80? They wouldn't even know. Studer, what is that? You know, because they've grown up in a culture of computer technology. So I think also you have to have a broad overview of the history of where this technology came from and what we're trying to do with the technology, for sure. And the earlier you start, the better.
It, just like Ebony, you mentioned there being a standard in schools. I would love to see a standard for recording studios, and I know that's harder because a lot of them are privately owned or don't exist anymore. But just as the restaurants have like a grading system, it would be great to have some type of grading system around code of conduct, because a lot of, you know, there's just a lot of practices that happen that I've experienced that are just, you know, they're just shady, they don't make sense, or they foster pushing people in various directions. And it will be great if sometimes people learn, or sometimes change happens honestly through shame or through, you know, a reveal of some sort. So, you know, some studios would be known as being A level, some will be B, you know. But I would love to see something like that, where there's a code of conduct standard in studios.
Yeah, I think that professionalism is part of that, and I also think that our expectations just kind of need to be articulated. You know, for example, I've had students come to me to tell me things that have happened to them in an academic environment that are not cool. And I'll give you one example. There was a student of mine who was on a team with 3 white classmates, and they were going to do kind of a yo boy commercial. You know, like, hey, yo, come check out whatever. And the young black male said, I'm not comfortable with this.
I'm glad he spoke up, though.
Yes, yes. So, I mean, it's about professionalism. It's about, it's a different kind of standard than you were just mentioning. But encouraging our students to be professional, and that's raising the bar in that way. And let me also say, being brave enough as an educator to say that, because I think a lot of times we're like, oh, kids will be kids. These are not kids. They're 18, 22-year-old people. So, sorry, I wanted to speak to that point, but in a kind of different way.
And the other thing that I wanted to say is I'm penning a book on hip-hop technology right now, and when I looked for books on hip-hop technology, there were like two. There's one called Beat Tips Manual by Amir Saeed. There's another one called the Hip-Hop, The Art of Hip-Hop or something by Joseph Schloss out of Tufts, and he's an ethnomusicologist. And then there's about 300 or more books on hip-hop as culture, fashion, culture, but not tying it together with technology. And I think that's a grave disservice to what hip-hop is and what hip-hop has done. Because I'm not even sure, well, I don't know what came first or whatever, but I know that when Pete Rock went into a sampler and sliced it up into 16th notes and then started rearranging things, that must give somebody at Akai the idea, oh, let's put this chopping feature into the MPC. When Public Enemy does what they do with the sampler and does multi-arrangements, oh, now let's make the MPC 4000, we'll not just have programs and samples, we'll have whatever the other parameter was, we could take the programs and now put them into another, they call it a multi. So much of the technological advances at the manufacturers themselves are interactions between people that are using the technology and using it in ways that connect with people. Now, rock and roll wasn't grabbing the drum machine or the sampler and saying, hey, let's make a rock record with the drum machine or the sampler. That was hip hop. Folk music wasn't doing that. Classical music wasn't doing that. And so for technology to not be credited properly in academic spaces, in academic texts, in YouTube texts, whatever you want to call it, for it not to be linked is sending a message to young Black children, oh, that's not my space.
And a lot of that technology and the development is actually linked to a need, because not every Black kid grew up with a grand piano in their house.
Correct.
Right, that's right.
So they wanted to make music, and they tried to find the most expedient way to do so. And so that's also part of what was driving that technology and the development at the time as well.
Exactly.
I'm just curious, I don't know if somebody in the audience wants to raise their hand, but I'll direct the question to the panel. Have there been efforts to reverse engineering so that we're using the technology that are in the hands of our young people to teach them the theory? So do you see what I'm saying? Can we get to it backwards? Okay, so you didn't go to a 4-year institution and you didn't have audio theory 101 and you don't know the lambda equals, what is it, C equals lambda F, you don't know that. Okay, so, but now that you're into this technology, let me go back and show you what this means. Have there been efforts to sort of reach back and bring that stuff in formally in a book and in a classroom?
That's what I'm working on.
Are you? Okay.
I am working on it. It's tough, but I'm working on it.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Chelsea.
Hi.
Chelsea Joseph. I attend American University. I'm getting my master's in audio technology, but my undergrad is in communications. But I do come from a line of family members, especially in the Caribbean scene, that has done music. So for American University, I do feel like they have prepared me in the sense of giving me those foundational courses that I needed that the other students had, because they had their bachelor's degree actually in the program. So far from my experience, I feel like I have gotten a caveat of different classes, and I was fortunate to have an advisor to be able to allow me to have that. So I can only speak from my experience, that I can honestly say, like, thus far, like, I can know the foundations of like critical listening and how signal flows happens and things to that nature.
But if you wanted to break a Travis Scott record down, would you be able to have that conversation with your faculty member, or is that something that you have to do on your own?
I feel like I would have to do that on my own, because unfortunately, of course, American University, as we all know, it is a predominantly white institution.
Right.
And we do have a teacher that does do a hip hop production class, but unfortunately we don't have, like you said, we don't have a space that says that this is what hip hop music is, this is the creation of it, and how did this come about, and how is it broken down?
And there's so many different variations of hip hop, or I should say evolutions of hip hop, that even when an instructor tries, they might come in at the wrong point, or not wrong point, but they might come in at a point that might not be the most relevant point to a young student, which speaks to what we were talking about, meet them where they're at, you know.
So
That's great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Chelsea. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that brings to question, just the state of the academic of the staffs. I'm a Berkeley graduate. I graduated in '03, and at that time, I believe Carl Beatty was the only African American professor in that department, and I was very lucky to work with him and learn from him, and he kind of took me under his wing. But while one is great and Carl is brilliant, one is not enough. And you need people, because as Charles, there's lots of, we're talking about hip hop. Hip hop is broken down in a lot of different ways. R&B is broken down in a lot of different ways. Never mind our contributions to other musical genres.
And why they get lumped together is still a whole nother thing.
Right. That's a conversation that we're going to have later on, because it's like, they're very much not the same thing.
Yeah.
And so it's, okay, well, it's time for awards. Well, we're not going to give out all these awards.
Right.
Let's put them together and just, hand out a few. But, representation really does matter. And there's room for more than one person at a time. Like we had Carl shifted into a different lane, and then you came in, and that's when I got to know you. But it's like, this is a large staff. There's a lot of students.
Yeah.
Where's everybody else at?
Yeah.
But I'm just going to interject, because now we're getting into the representation conversation, which is great. However, I think everything that we're speaking about on this panel with respect to crediting culture, crediting African Americans for their contributions, I do think so much of that has to come from African Americans. African Americans have to appreciate the art that is coming from our communities. And sometimes, Tyler Perry just opened a studio in Atlanta, owns it outright as a black man, and Medea has been bastardized as an art form or as a character for years, right? So there has to be a sense of ownership, and representation is a part of that, but also we have to, as a culture, take our dollars and contribute to the valuation of our culture. The Smithsonian Black African American Institute in DC is an excellent example of this, where a lot of black people took their money and said, okay, we need a space and we need a forum. And a lot of those black people aren't seen. I like to say a lot of times, power is anonymous, right? Power really is anonymous. Sometimes you don't see the people writing the checks, but you feel their impact. Influence is great. You can be an influencer on Instagram and be completely broke, right? But power is impactful, and it can be felt even if you aren't seen, right? So I think when it comes to representation and when it comes to proper crediting of black people and our contributions, we really need to start to think about the people in our community who we don't see, who we may need to be reaching out to. Like if you are a chair or somebody at a school or an institution and you feel like, hey, we do need a program in our school that looks at this or looks at that, who are the African American trustees at your colleges and universities who may be able to get that done? People who you don't see, but who have the benefit and the impact. Because the reality is that the black middle class during the 80s were not very supportive of hip hop.
True.
And that's just a fact, right? And it's one of the reasons why we weren't really able to go in as a culture and own that music, own the copyrights, own the publishing. When you think about who really owns hip hop, who owns the publishing, who owns the intellectual property, a lot of times it's not people who look like us, right? And that has to do with the fact that the streets. That was where hip hop was largely coming from, the poor Black communities in America. The streets had no conduit. They had no real access to African Americans of power and African Americans of influence who had money to really start to legitimize and industrialize hip hop as an industry. So now we're backtracking now, because now we don't have a lot of representation. We don't have a lot of credibility. We don't have the enforcing power at the Grammys or in the P&E wing or, you know, in the Recording Academy. We don't have that. But that's a power issue. And that's an issue of us talking across class groups and really making sure that African Americans of prominence with money, with power, understand who we are. Are we talking to Colin Powell? Who are we talking to? From the hip hop community, Barack Obama has, I think, been the first of prominent politicians to really embrace the hip hop community in such an important way, making excellent relationships with Tyler Perry, with Jay-Z, with Beyonce, and also those artists seeing the benefit of creating those alliances. That's a tangent, but I think an important one. And when we're talking about visibility and power when it comes to hip hop, agency when it comes to hip hop, autonomy when it comes to hip hop, and the preservation of our culture as a people.
Good morning. Did you have a comment?
Good morning. My name is Daryl Dixon. I'm from New Orleans, and I'm enjoying this session.
But
really
more than that, tell them where you from, what you represent. This is a very important man right here.
No, I'm not. No.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Basically, I'm from New Orleans. I'm director of the Ellis Marcellus Center for Music in New Orleans. My job is basically educational programming, as well as I'm the audio engineer for the center. You know, we do have a recording studio there. And one of the programs that I have implemented is audio production. You know, on Saturday mornings, we have, you know, a teacher that comes in, and I'm a techie. I believe in technology. And we teach kids how to do audio production. Now, I'm also a fundamentalist. You have to know how to work the Mackie before you get to the SSL.
Right.
All right, so you have to understand how these cables work and what cable does what before I put you on Pro Tools or anything else. Because Pro Tools is just going to look at you and say, I'm waiting on you, dummy. You know, so it's about signal flow, which I teach young kids, and we deal with kids from 7 all the way to 18. We're located in the Ninth Ward of New Orleans, which is the deprived area of New Orleans.
That's hardcore.
We was founded by Harry Connick and Bradford Marcellus. And these guys could have put this center, and it's a beautiful place. If you ever get a chance to come down to New Orleans, come see it. They could have put it anywhere in New Orleans, but they wanted to put it in an area that was underserved by the city of New Orleans. And a lot of times I say we're a hidden gem, because when you come to the Ninth Ward, and all of a sudden it opens up to this facility, and you say, wow. But when you go inside, you say, wow, wow. You know, we teach kids, and I'm a fundamentalist. I believe in teaching kids the fundamentals of music. I believe that if you have an understanding of music fundamentals, it makes you a better audio engineer, because now you can relate to the talent that's in that room. You know, when you turn around and say, well, man, I think that note was a little bit sharp, or maybe we should have did this chord progression going there. Now all of a sudden, you're not just an engineer, you're also a team member, because you're trying to put out a better product. And a lot of musicians respect that. I was very fortunate to work with Patrick Smith and Delphio Marcellus. You know, they was dragging me around the streets of New York. That's where I got my training at. You know, working with Wynton Marcellus and Bradford Marcellus on projects. You know, so I think the key to it is education. But I think we have to start at a younger age, because these kids understand technology. I mean, we have iPads, computers, and everything else. And I'll ask them, like, how do I do this? You know, so my goal is starting kids off as young as possible, getting into audio engineering, into signal flow, making them understand there's a connection there, giving them hands. I believe in throwing you in a pool. You know, so let them touch the SSL. It's not going to hurt it, you know, but understand what you're touching, understand the buttons and concepts. And going back to Miss Ebony's statement about, you know, in the school system, and I've been an educator 20 years, charter schools are private entities using public money for profit. Okay? It's hard to penetrate them because it's about the bottom line. So if you're going to implement a program that's going to take away from the bottom line, the CEO may have something to say about that. But if we as a community say, this is what we want for our kids, we want them to understand the hip-hop history, we want them to understand audio production, we want them to understand coding, okay? Now they have to listen to us because we are the parents of these kids. And if you're not embracing technology today, you're going to be in a pretty sorry state in a couple of years. You know, so I think you're on point, but I think we have to find a way to get kids into the technology and make them understand what's the career path of this technology. We just started a program with Apple on coding, and we're trying to teach our kids how to code, because everything we do is about coding today. It's been coded by someone, you know, and network security is going to be the biggest field in the next couple of years. You know, so if we could start at a younger age, I mean, I use the Williams system as an example. They didn't start playing tennis at 18. When they was 18, they was making 6 figures. You know, so if we start kids off at a younger age, understanding the technology, what they can do with it, right? And who knows where they're going to go with it. I mean, it wasn't, my sister took me to the Jackson 5's Commodore concert when I was a kid. And the first thing I asked, what that guy doing over there? The guy behind it, what is he doing? All the way, it was a mystery. As you say, it was the mystery of it. You know, so if we can open this field up, you know, this is going to be one of the, and I told a young man yesterday, this is going to be one of the biggest events at this convention.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I like what you said, too, about pathways. So you nailed it, because that's one of the things that we want to talk about. So if once we get the foundation and we know the theory and you get your diploma and you walk out the door, then what? So Ebony, I think you had, how do we create better pathways for emerging talent? Was that Ebitda?
Ebitda. I think it was me.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, with the Creator Suite organization that I founded to support women in music production, that's always the question. How do we create better pathways for emerging talent? There's so many. What I realized when I started in recording studios, I didn't see a lot of women, didn't see a lot of women of color. Fast forward 10, 15 years later, we have social media, and you Google, you know, hashtag female engineers, and you see a lot. Hashtag female producers. So I was like, there's a disconnect here. Somehow, either when women get into the space, they're not encouraged to continue, or they just don't know about these opportunities. So that's a constant thing that I'm trying to find out, is creating relationships with brands, creating relationships with studios, creating relationships with people of power, as you were saying, to create a channel to bring this excellent talent into these spaces. And then once they get in the spaces, you know, having some, you know, influence on how that works out.
I think I don't think that, I know for a fact there are some scholarly research about the space and the gendering of the space that can be perceived to be a masculine space. Right. And I think, you know, Ebitda, you told me a funny story about when you started the Creator Suite. You didn't identify it as a space for women.
Well, there's no gendering in the name of it.
Right.
People, I had somebody, I don't know, not curse me out, but almost curse me out on Instagram because they weren't able, a woman found it and she wasn't able to pass it off to her boyfriend because he was a producer. And so she was just like, oh my gosh, this is great, but how dare you, blah, blah, blah. I was just like, okay, it's weird. But, you know, that's part of it. It's part of like normalizing, you know, the concept of, you know, when you think technical, you don't just think male. So, yeah.
And let's see, the pathways that are being created, I think, for women and women in technical spaces, you know, as part of my research, we identified 60 such spaces for women in the United States, Canada, Australia, the UK, and Africa. And so it's definitely a movement, but it's not a new thing. So in the year 2019, we think of this as a revolution, but women finding their own space in professional environments happens with the American Medical Women's Association, the American Association of Women Journalists, so there's all sorts of examples of women finding and claiming their space. But when you talk also about pathways for emerging talent, can you speak perhaps to that pull, to that reaching back that our established engineers are doing? It's a lot of work to sort of make sure that they have a space into which they can arrive.
Okay, I'll take that. So pathways. If the opening door for the stream is either shut off or slightly cracked, then you have to think about that small opening, right? So right now, for women, for people of color, also for marginalized groups, there's a slight crack, right, in the door as far as getting your music heard. So I just want to go through a few things. If you're an engineer, producer, these are some kind of practical steps as far as you getting your music to the next level. A&R. These are the traditional pathways, right? A&R, artists and repertoire at labels. There are 3 major record labels: Universal Music Group, Sony Music Entertainment, and there's Warner Music Group. Under those 3 labels, top labels, there are all the subsidiaries: Atlantic Records, there's Columbia, there's RCA, nested under these 3 major groups. So you have 3 conglomerates. Go to those websites. Who are the A&R at these companies? Know them, befriend them on social media, DM them, do what you can to get in touch with those people. Send them music. Have a very basic email that you send out to people. And this is what I did. People always ask me, how'd you get in the door? And look, prayer, a lot of prayer, and a lot of this, right? So you should have a list of the people because when you talk about pathways, you're talking about doors, and thus you're talking about gatekeepers. So get to know the gatekeepers. 3 major record labels, all the important majors are under them. Who are those A&R? Get to know those people. Second pathway, music publishers. Music publishers. There are lots of major music publishers. There's Warner Music Group, Universal Music Publishing, and there's Sony ATV. Those are the 3 majors. And you have a bunch of great independents like Cobalt and Pure Music and Pulse. They have A&R staff. Same thing, right? So you need to have a list for labels, a list for publishers. And if you're an engineer, these are all your same people. Whether you're a producer or an engineer, these are people that get you work. All right, the third group, PROs. Okay, there's performance rights organizations. They all have the same people. They have A&R staff. Do the same thing. In the United States, we got 3. Once again, we have CSAC, we have ASCAP, we have BMI. Get to know those people. They're on the internet. They're literally on the internet. Who runs these companies? When are they doing events? Those are the people who are your gatekeepers. They open the doors. And then you have to look up your artist managers, right? So if you want to make music for Travis Scott, if you want to make music for Janelle Monáe, who manages these people? It's right on the internet. Find those names. They're right on social media. DM them, get to know them, where they're partying, get in their stories. Where are they? Are they in LA? Usually people are telling you where they are in their stories. We out here at, okay, go there. Like wherever they are. We out here at Spotify today. Okay, where's Spotify? Go down. If you live in New York, you have an advantage in particular because all the major media conglomerates are headquartered in New York. If you're in LA, you have twice as much of an advantage, right? So I say this when we're talking about pathways, I say this because sometimes it's as easy as being on the internet. If you're there anyway, if you're spending 30, 40, 5 hours a day on Instagram, help yourself out. Help yourself out a little bit because those are the existing gateways. Now, in terms of pathways, if you get in through one of those gatekeepers, because you only need one, you're going to email 100 people, but you only need one. When you get in, leave the door cracked. That's it. Leave the door cracked. And bring in more people who can help you push the door open. And when you get in there, you're able to make those decisions and do those things that you need to do with respect to getting these computer music courses in schools, with respect to bringing in more women engineers, because now you have more projects. You're too busy for your projects. I'm grateful now that I'm in a position where I can hand projects off to people. I don't have time for this. VNotes, take this. Gloria Cabot, take this. And it's introducing more people to those A&R who I originally established relationships with. So I think it's chess, not checkers. And it's about doing the things that people don't want to do, like creating a spreadsheet of the top 100 A&R and emailing them once a month. That's the administrative and the boring and the non-Instagram worthy stuff that people don't want to do, but that creates pathways for streams and not just a trickle from a faucet,
Absolutely. I'll just add to that to say be ready, because, when somebody does knock on your door, you say, wait a minute, so have it together when the door opens and you're ready to walk through. One of the things I'm sort of darting around, we're covering, believe it or not, we are actually hitting all of our discussion notes in one way or another. But one of the things that I want to take advantage of is some listening that we're going to do this morning. So heads up. The historical and cultural perception of Black engineers and making space for African Americans in non-traditional Black styles. And before we play this piece, I sort of want to just go down the line and say something you didn't know. So for each of you, maybe throw, did you know that I worked on? So I'll start. For example, did you know that I was a recording engineer for the Colorado Symphony Orchestra? It's not hip hop, And the other thing I wanted to say is when you listen to National Public Radio, if anybody was listening to NPR in the 1990s when I was there, half of the engineering staff was Black. And I didn't know if you knew that or not, but there were 40 techs and 20 of them were Black and 10 of them were female. So, the more you know, okay? And then I'm going to skip you, Paul, for now. You'll go last. And so, Jay, did you know?
Did you know that I worked with the LaSalle Quartet?
Ebitda? Yeah.
I would say, did you know that I work with Derek Trucks? Toots and the Maytal. It's a big record.
Wow. Did you know that I worked on Hamilton?
Yeah. She will not. And got a Grammy certificate for that work, too.
That's right.
Did you know that I worked with Eddie Palmieri, one of the kings of salsa?
Awesome. So that brings us to Willie Green. So one day I got an email from Willie Green, said, do you know where I can get some headphones? I said, yes, I do, because I'm an AES governor and I know Sean Olive. And so anyway, we facilitated the procurement of headphones. Tell us what that project was about.
Sure. I also want to throw in my did you know. Did you know my first 3 professional records were all heavy metal records?
Whoa.
That's when I graduated college, I opened a studio, and I had friends who were making metal records. And they're like, Paul, you got the studio, you got mics, let's do it. So that was my first 3 projects. But my most recent project over the summer, and I want to tie it in with, we're often put in boxes in what is Black music. Black music is whatever music Black people are making, right? It's that simple, but it's like, okay, I make music, and you go out in the world, it's like, I'm a musician. Oh, you don't make that crap music. People always think that joke is real funny, is that crap music, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not real music. There's 4 lads from Liverpool, that's real music. And to be honest, like the Beatles conversation is triggering for me, because bands like that are always used to shame what we do. And I was like, no, I make hip hop. Like, I'm an 80s baby. I grew up on this. And when I listen to my parents' music at home, they're playing Smokey, they're playing Marvin, they're playing their music. So I didn't grow up in a Beatles household or a Zeppelin household. And I talked to someone and say I make music, and they're like, no, that's music. That's just not my world. I respect these artists, but that's not what is inside me. And so we wind up in these lanes, and it's, not just, all right, well, black people don't do rock. Well, we do. Black people don't do EDM. We do. But also avant-garde music, different things. Without getting into a certain lane, so much black music is monetized, and it's entertainment, and it's for this. But what about spaces to be abstract and be experimental? There's all kinds of experimental rock genres. There's so many subnames or whatever. But what is abstract black music today? And there is space and there are people doing it, and there's a sublane called art rap, which is where a lot of my work lives in. Artists like Shabazz Palaces, JPEG Mafia, Open Mike Eagle, Arm & Hammer, people trying to do different things, and not for a mainstream thing, but just for expression. We need to just be allowed to express whatever weird things are happening in our brains. So this summer, I collaborated with an art gallery here in Manhattan, Massey Klein Gallery, for an installation called Press Play, where I'm sampling paintings. I chose 10 paintings from their collection, and I use the software called Sonic Photo to turn those images into sound. And for each of those paintings, every sound in the piece, from the drums to the bass to the synths, everything is made just from that painting. It's called Sonic Photo. And so I would manipulate the sounds like, okay, I need a kick drum. So I'm gonna take this basic sound, I'm gonna pitch it down, I'm gonna make it short. And so there's the beginning of my kick drum, and then I'll dump things into Cubase and mix them from there. And I made an instrumental hip hop album made specifically from painting. So I'll give you a little piece of that now. The artist, this is one of them. Artist is Julia Dall'Olio. She's from Italy, and this is, I'm going to jump in. It's a long piece, but this is from Press Play. Fade out at the engineering conference. And that's just a little piece, and that's not to say, this is my work, but that to me, that's what that painting sounds like in my head, right? But I feel like in art in general, black folks are not really often allowed to be whimsical. Whimsy is always kind of seen like for other people. Black art is often, and necessarily so, serious. It's political. It is driven from the history that we've shared, and we need to discuss those things. But we also need the space to take that weight off and just be free and creative and imaginative, because that's living. In the Steve Jordan keynote yesterday, he said something, I had to tweet it right after, and I credited him as quote, but he said, art is the highest form of hope. And that really touched me. It's like you got to be able to dream and imagine things that don't exist yet, because that's how we get them. That's how they become to exist.
That's hot.
That's beautiful.
That's hot.
Really beautiful. Again, I have to sort of I have all these dissolves and fades, and I'm trying to be too cute with my slideshow here. The one thing that we haven't touched on is this last piece. I think maybe if we take between 8 to 10 minutes here to discuss this, we'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions. So hip-hop production and its influence on model recording techniques across genres, for example, bass and low end focus, programmed drum production recording in the red, as explained in Trisha Rose's Black Noise. Let's spend some time there.
Yeah, that was one of my points, talking points. I brought that up because the more and more I'm working across genres, I'm seeing that all recording is sample-based now, even in rock, because what you're seeing in particular is lots of sample replacement, especially for drums, one-shots that have been created, and downloads of one-shots from Splice or Sounds.com now being the compositional bed for rock music. Also snapping to a grid, the type of quantization that is happening even in rock music. Everything's to a click these days. That's a very hip-hop centric and drum machine centric production style that I think has made its way into pretty much all forms of recording. Sampling is existent within pretty much all genres. And also auto-tune is used across all genres. Hip-hop artists were not the first to use auto-tune, but auto-tune has become a standard, even in Broadway recordings. You're seeing auto-tune being relied upon to help quantize pitch. So, and I think T-Pain obviously gets a lot of credit for introducing auto-tune as a stylized device, but in a creative device. But it's also used purely for corrective purposes across genres. And sometimes you see it used as a stylized device, even in rock, even especially in EDM. When you hear records by Zed, sometimes it's reminiscent of what Roger Troutman was doing.
Dayton, Ohio.
With his vocal manipulations on the Zapp and Roger records, which is, I would say, the grandfather of hip hop in so many ways, Roger Troutman, and what he was able to do with how he put his compositions together and the type of technologies he used to make and compose his music. So those are some of my just kind of overall examples, but it's great to hear from the rest of the panel on what some of the contributions that maybe I'm not. Also, the crossfade, right? The crossfade as just a technological innovation that is now a standard feature in programs like Ableton. Crossfading as a creative technique and a production device, scratching in records that aren't hip hop records. So turntablism, that art and how it's made its way into other genres of music, especially in EDM. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts on that.
Or even, Brent, I'll let you talk and sing, but I was listening to Ryuichi Sakamoto the other day. Does anybody know Ryuichi Sakamoto?
Of course.
Do you remember Neo Geo from the 80s? I just have that in my head right now. I wish I could just Alexa play Neo Geo. But just, so the derivation isn't just for American music. I mean, we're hearing it in Japan, China, Korea as well.
This is my 14th year at Berkeley, and when I first went into Berkeley, traditional recording, drums, bass, keys, so forth, is still, the primary concept in production and engineering. And it's good to have that foundation, but the skill set started to take off and go another direction in the 80s with the dawn of the Lin LM1 and the Roland TR-808, and that whole skill set has become something else. So I created a commercial record production curriculum that tries to address many of the points that are in urban music, that are in black music. And in that curriculum, one of the talking points is the extension of the low end in compositions. We went from 50 cycles because mastering engineers couldn't. They said that if you try to go below 50 cycles on the vinyl, the groove will be so wide that the needle will skip out of the record. So let's limit a lot of the information below 50 cycles. And that was a really important point. But with the dawn of digital audio, we've gone down now to 40 to 30. Ed Sheeran's, what's the last one? He said, boom, dum, I Don't Care. Look, I'm listening to I Don't Care on some large speakers, and I hear this. And it's not an artifact from another instrument. It's 23 cycles. I did the analysis, I studied it. It's in the key of G sharp. Yes, that's how deep we get, right? And 23 cycles is G sharp. And I'm like, who did that? Was it Serban, the mixing engineer? Was it the producer? You know, was it the artist? We're working at more sub and sub levels, and where does that come from? That comes from hip hop. So then last year I was hanging out with Hank Shockley from Public Enemy. We're at some studio and we were listening to this boom, this crazy 808. It was just making your stomach rumble, right? And Hank was like, yo, this Prince Charles, yeah, you put on one of them joints from the 90s. I was like, no, Hank, don't do it. He said, put on that joint from the 90s. So we put on Faith Evans' Bubba da Dink, and Love Like This, right? And I'm like, oh my God, there's no bottom. If I mixed that record now, I would crush that record. But that aesthetic from the 90s, I was trying to do a lot of bottom, but I didn't have access to where we can go now. And if you're not hearing like that, if you're not listening like that, if you're not conditioning yourself as a creative artist in that aesthetic, you won't know how to make that record. Right. So those of us that are the educators need to open up our minds to the aesthetic, to understand why Highest in the Room by Travis Scott is a dope record, even though the kick drum only appears in the chorus and only half of the chorus. That the bass line is built on some variation of the 808 Warfare kick. Well, it's actually a bass or a kick or maybe some combination of the two. And for us to be able to speak that language. If you can't speak that language, you're only talking about half of a production ability at this moment. If you can only do drums and bass and guitars and keyboards and synthesizers, you're only talking about half of the aesthetic. The other half of the aesthetic has become a textural and timbral aesthetic. When I grew up, it was a chordal and melodic aesthetic. So we've gone way past chords and melodies, guys. We're into a whole nother world.
I'm glad to hear you say that because that's something that production-wise, I don't know that I've heard it articulated that way. I've just been doing it.
Right, exactly.
So you're finding textures that have no real key framework, and you're just putting them in your music, verbing them out, creating nice mid-range with them, but there's really no chordal substance to it, but you need it there, and it in the contrast sometimes creates a bit of dissonance it works within the context of whatever the key is, because it's creating this tension.
Space, as Miles Davis found out, and Kind of Blue, has energy. And rock and roll found that out with let's put drums in ambient space and use the ambient space as energy in our compositions. Well, historically, black music has been pretty dry, recording in closets and in small, intimate spaces. So our music hasn't when I got into engineering, it was like, let's go to that room and get that big drum sound. And I'm like, none of the records that I like have big drum sounds. So what are they talking about? Ohio Players don't have big drum sounds. Kool and the Gang don't have big drum sounds. Or Motown didn't have big drum sounds. So am I the weird one? No, I was the black one.
Well, also a lot of that, the importance of the extension of the low end comes from the somatic experience that you get. It connects to your body, and that experientially connects you to the music more. So, I see a lot of kids in my class, and this one kid, Nate, first thing he says, no matter what kind of record, we could be doing classical, we could be doing whatever, jazz, he's like, let's get that bottom going. More bass, And that's the truth. When you feel it, you feel it. And so that connecting element, the somatic part of it, and bass is one of the only elements that can really do that.
And I've seen some research, I don't know how accurate the research is, but it has something to do with the tones in the womb, where our timbres are, culturally, who's got higher voices, who's got lower voices, so forth and so on.
That's, basic primate behavior. Exactly. Primates respond to low frequency response. If you want to get your dog to do something, you go, hi, Spotty. You go, Spotty.
Right.
Stop. Daniel, I'm angry with you now.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and it's really cultural, you know, and part of the lineage too. Like you can trace like back to, you know, the sound clash like in the park in the 70s, and it's about the sound systems and who's got the bigger system coming from, you know,
The Caribbean festivals.
exactly.
Those
exactly.
things on those trucks, man.
Right. Yeah. Like, you know, I was out there on Eastern Parkway this year, and you walk by, and you are literally feeling like being pushed back by these. I don't know if you know about the West Indian Day parade in Brooklyn, but it's tractor trailers with big sound systems, and this is the lineage all the way back to the 70s. Before that, back to Jamaica, back to the islands, about having the biggest system, and you would set up on different ends of the block, and whoever rocked the party more, that's where you went. And so this is literally in our lineage, this low end.
But we have to articulate it, and that's why I've been actually working on my book for 12 months. I thought I was going to finish it in 6 months. I mean, 12 years. I thought I was going to finish it in 6 months. When I first proposed the book, and they said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I'm going to do this whole trajectory of black music." And, you know, I did drum machines and samplers. I did all that stuff, so I'd do it in 6 months. 12 years later, I'm on the second edited draft, so hopefully it'll be out next year, because I think the conversation. Okay, codifying hip hop is kind of like codifying jazz. Remember when Louis Armstrong had the tissue over his fingers or the napkin over his fingers because he didn't really want anybody to see him what he was doing, because it's like you just are jazz. You shouldn't have to codify jazz. I get that, but we did codify it. So you shouldn't have to codify hip hop. You should just be hip hop. I get that, but it's going to be codified. By whom?
Right.
And I think it should start with us.
Okay. Nicely put. If you've come in a little bit late and didn't get to see the beginning of the presentation, please use the benefits of your membership at aes.org/live to enjoy the archived version of this panel. I think I'll go ahead and open it for questions, but first I'd like to hear a round of applause for our panelists today.
Good morning. Getting to the low end part, you're absolutely.
You got it. You got it already, bro.
Tear the roof. Hold on, you got to do one thing for me. Wow. Tear the roof off the sucker. Tear the roof
Come
off.
on, Charles.
Right there. You know about Ray Davies.
Yeah.
Right there. Tear the roof. Oh my God.
I want to thank all of y'all for coming out this morning. My name is Rodney Askew. I'm an engineer. In the 90s, I did a lot of work here in New York.
Rodney's big
I
time.
met Charles. Charles was the first black engineer I met. I was so happy to meet Charles when I saw Charles.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, and to see all of y'all here on this panel, to see the governor here at AES, and it's awesome. So I just wanted to thank you, that's all.
Yeah.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
As soon as I heard your voice, I was like, we got to get you on record, man. Another giant. This is William Spaceman Patterson.
Hey.
Hey. Great guitar player,
Look, first of all, black engineers have been around for a long time.
Yeah.
Right.
And people never wanted to talk about classic records that black engineers were there, or the pioneering things, because as all of you know, we will try anything. Mm-hmm. and because
You have to.
And sometimes we don't have the tools or the resources to be able to do something. So someone will say, well, let's put the amp in the chimney or something. You know, because we want to hear something. We're not getting enough reverb in the room, so let's hang some mics down and point it up and see what happens. Mm-hmm. So, first of all, I applaud all of you being here, you know. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about in education and legacy, this whole thing of genre thing always confuses me. Because for myself, you know, I've been blessed to be able to, I always tell people to have worked with any people from Sun Ra to Kathy Lee Gifford. Now, that is a sick range if you don't understand what kind of range that is. And everybody in the midst of that. So what happens is that as black artists and creators and producers and engineers, when we come on the scene, we bring something that enhances the whole industry. And everybody, you guys were talking about how the influence of hip hop, everything we've done has always influenced everything throughout the course of time. And the important thing of the youth coming up to know that there are no limits, and just do whatever it is. If you hear something, what it is. You know, we remember when sampling first happened, everybody I knew so many guys that heard doors slam and say, damn, that would be a good bass drum.
Right.
Because, you know, there's some doors and stuff like that. But that's not where sampling went right offhand. But I was telling someone the other day, working with Sly Stone, everybody remembers Sly and the Family Stone. Someone gave Sly Stone his first sampler. And he got his first sampler, and we were working on some stuff. So I'm going to the studio, and Sly's looking over with that look saying, man, go in the studio, go listen to that track. And I go in the room, and I'm listening, this thing is like, Sly had sampled his fart. And the music that came out of Sly Stone's fart was, I wish I had the tape, but it was so incredible. And he's singing all the time. And I used to have that tape, and when I was in the Jamaica Boys with Marcus Miller, I used to play it for Marcus, and Marcus would say, damn, that fart song. As soon as he met Sly, he said, I heard that fart tape. So, and even I told Sly's brother Freddie a few weeks ago when he was here about the fart tape, just meaning that he didn't know that wasn't, he was, you know, that's something that you don't do.
Right.
But the fact that you guys will try anything, and when you hear the wide range of stuff, like the kids need to know, first of all, they should know the history of the music and know how, especially when you start talking about frequencies. Like, remember when we tried to do those records, like you said, we wanted the low frequencies, and when they did the test pressings, it would bounce off.
I had to always go to the mastering room to make sure that we could get as much lows as possible.
Yeah. But it's just interesting hearing you guys talk about all the different things, and for the sisters being on the scene. I remember when the sisters start coming in, Melanie. I mean, it was a lot of different, it just, women hear things differently, and they got a different vibe. Yeah. So that all enhances it. But we need to have some sort of a consortium or something where we don't have to wait for a year for AES, that we can continually go to a place, let it be like weekly or monthly, that there's places where, that we go to hear things, that people are able to experiment with things, that people can have their little rigs set up. We can have some people or the sound companies, bring the big ass speakers. Let's hear what things really sound like.
I'm gonna give you an analogy, right? Engineering is not sexy. Thank you for that space. I'm gonna give you an analogy. Engineering is not sexy right now. And I know this is the AES, and yes, we think it's sexy, but engineering is not sexy. Everybody wants to be an artist, especially in the black music or the black people that create music spectrum. But when I watch the NFL, and every time those guys come on and say, my name is Charles Alexander, and I went to FSU. My name is, John Davis, and I went to Ball State. Our children are being imprinted with an idea that in order for me to be involved in that, I have to raise my education. I have to raise my connection to academia. And our industry, and there's lots and lots of reasons, it's like, please be the most destroyed human being you can be in order for you to be lauded praise in our music industry. So from there, it's like, yeah, I'm the dopest rapper and I smoke blunts. It's not, yeah, I'm the dopest rapper and I have a degree in physics and marketing.
Went to Harvard.
And went to Harvard. So I can't fix the world. The world is what it is. But at least if we're aware of what the hurdle is, then we know how to jump over the hurdle, because we're looking at the hurdle for what the hurdle is.
Thank you very much. That brings us to our time today. I wish we could go on, but we did take a very leisurely pace, and that felt good, I think. And so thanks. Please, again, thanks to our panel, and enjoy the rest of the convention.